yes, AI can do a lot. It can do a lot of editing tasks. It's very capable and very powerful, but in it by itself, it can't do these things. It requires knowledgeable human editors who know AI prompting, who know how to work with these tools to be able to use them to edit text in a way that makes it a level where it is actually readable and something that people want to spend their time reading.
Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening.
On today's episode of the Leaving Academia podcast, I'm talking with Erin Servais. Erin is an editor and instructor who teaches editors to upskill with artificial intelligence. She's been an instructor for the UC San Diego editing program, and she has presented about editing, entrepreneurship, and AI for a variety of editing professional associations. Erin has also been a guest lecturer at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Journalism and Media. And what we're going to be mainly focused on today is her course that she launched in 2023, AI for Editors. As of this recording, she's taught it to hundreds of students in over 20 countries, and I am very eager to speak to you, Erin, about how this came about and how it's going and all of your thoughts about AI for editors. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Paulina.
So let's start at the beginning, as we always do here. Tell us about your background and how you got into editing.
All right. I started out my career as a journalist. I have a degree in journalism, but I only did that for a few years at the very start of my career before I realized that what I really liked doing was editing. So I started editing as a copy editor at a local book publisher in the Twin Cities where I'm based. And I have worked as an editor until 2023 when I started my AI for Editors course, and I quickly became my full-time job. So from the beginning, a few years after the beginning of my career until 2023, I was an editor mainly for books, doing all levels of editing, starting with copy editing, but eventually working my way up to focusing on developmental editing.
And I'm always curious about how your editing career developed. How did you get started? Who were your first clients? How did you sort of evolve and like figure out? I feel like it's always a journey for people, where they start in one subfield of editing or sub area and then the style, and then they go and they're like, wait a minute, I really hate copy editing. Let me try this other thing. So I'm curious what that journey was like for you.
For me, I was mainly a freelancer with contracts at different small publishers, and then I worked my way to have my own clients, and that's what the last 10 or so years of my career was, working with individual authors. And I learned pretty early that I preferred fiction to nonfiction. The main reason being that I despised formatting reference lists and citations.
That's fair.
Which now, because of AI, that is so much easier to do. Maybe if the timelines had been different, it would have turned out that that would have been my focus. But because I did not like the formatting so much, I went with fiction, and that's where I spent most of my time. It was a gradual evolving process. As I got to learn more about editing in the industry, and as I got to meet more authors and get myself out there more, I was able to go from working just for publishers to a little mix where I would have some publishing clients and then some individual clients until I was able to shift entirely to working with individual authors. And for the last few years of my editing career, where that was my full-time job, I ran a small editorial agency where I had my own contractors working for me so I could do the developmental editing for a book and then have a contractor do the copy editing, for example.
Oh, that sounds like a great model. I feel like a lot of editors, we hit our capacity as solopreneurs and we want to keep growing our business. And that's sort of the you reach this fork in the road where you can either start an agency or you can go the like course and coaching route. So, but I've never heard anybody describe their agency the way you just did, where it's sort of like, you hired people who take on different stages of the project, but you still continue to do the developmental editing. So how did you like running the agency? Maybe that's a loaded question.
There's a lot of pressure with being responsible to other people.
Hmm.
I And that part I realized I did not like as much, like making sure that I was getting the contractors a steady flow of clients. Contracted with other agencies and publishers, and they had their own clients. I didn't have any full-time employees, but still, I wanted to do my best for them, and that was tricky running a business, more complicated than I thought because I don't have that business background and I don't have an MBA. I had to learn a lot of lessons by making mistakes, which is a one way to learn the better ways to do certain things, but it's not the most pleasant way. So for me, I find that I like it better when I am more of a solopreneur
Yeah.
because I don't have to worry about other people and being making sure that they're taken care of as well. There's less pressure just because of that. I say that and knowing that I'm at that same point in my career as a course creator and an instructor where to keep up with demand, I'm having to take on contractors and people to help me. And so here I am again, but I feel differently about it this time because I learned the
Yeah.
hard lessons the first time around, and I think I am making better, more strategic, better informed decisions now.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you on that. And when I faced the same question, I realized that I did not want to have anything to do with supervising people or having to make sure, people were getting paid every project, every 2 weeks, whatever it would be. And there is, I think for many of us, once we taste that freedom of working alone and not being obviously you're not totally free because you have to serve your clients or your students or whatever, but that's very different, I think, than being tied down with staff or employees or contractors or whatever. And yeah, it adds a whole other level of stress, I think, to running your business. And yeah, so I totally get that. That's why I ended up creating a course instead too.
So we've had a similar journey then.
Yeah, yeah. So what got you, how did you go from the agency to when did you get this idea for exploring AI? What interested you in AI?
My interests in AI have been since I was single digits. I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, I remember those days.
And conveniently, it came on right after school let out. So
Yeah.
I watched a lot of that. And I read a lot of science fiction growing up too. I still do. But I've been interested in AI as a concept for a very long time. And
That's
I've
cool.
paid attention to the developments in the technology, most especially in the last a little over a decade, since the "is this a cat" era of AI, where it was trying to just pattern match and identify cats. Isn't it? How wonderful that felines are so integral to the development of this very important technology. But that's one of the early successes with AI is when it was able to correctly say, yes, this is a cat. So I've been paying attention since those days, and I've been working with large language models, which is what the big buzz is about now. Like that's what, for instance, ChatGPT is. I've been working with those since about 2021, which is pretty early days for them. They were a lot more
Rudimentary.
weird
Weird.
and surprising
Yeah.
back then and fun in a completely different way than they are today. But I've been interested in this technology for almost my entire life. And I decided to make this the focus of my career and make that big shift in spring 2023 when for the first time I thought to ask ChatGPT to copy edit a piece of text. And I don't remember my exact prompt. I'm sure it was very rudimentary, but it did a perfect job.
Really?
Yes, yes. And in that moment, I made the decision to wind down the agency I was running and put all of my effort into getting some training out there about this technology, specifically in this niche for editors, because I saw that it was going to completely change the way that we work, and everybody was going to need to learn how to use it at one point or another.
Yeah. First, I want to say I love that this is one of the things I love the most about having a business is that you've sort of come full circle, right? You said you've been so intrigued by sci-fi and artificial intelligence and these concepts for so long, never having any idea as a child that what was going to come to be. And yet here you are able to build your business, to pivot, to shift your existing business to something that you absolutely have loved forever. So that is, I just want to point that out that entrepreneurship is so amazing because you can do that, that you could do whatever you want and just do the stuff that made you thrilled as a child, which is so rewarding.
And
And then,
thank goodness for Star Trek.
right, what would we do without Star Trek? And then the second thing is that you had the foresight to start very early on to get into using AI for editors or as an editor. And I have a blog post on my website that I wrote that is kind of cheeky, but I took a section of my dissertation. It was like, I don't know, a couple paragraphs or something. And I inserted some errors like typos and spelling and grammar errors and stuff. And I ran it through ChatGPT and it didn't do a great job. And so I'm curious to explore that with you because I suspect that the answer is that it's in the prompt, right? Is the magic in the prompt of how we prompt these tools to copy edit, or why did you have such a good experience, but oftentimes we plug stuff in and it's just really terrible at editing?
What I've found is that the more specific you can be in your prompt, especially with editing prompts, the better the results that you'll get. And whenever I hear from editors that they tried AI for editing and they didn't have a good experience, I found that it's typically because they were using a vague prompt. Whenever we say edit this text in our heads, we know what that means, but the AI doesn't. You have to be very literal and very specific in what you tell it to do. So you could say, edit this text for to remove cliches and being very narrowly focused and very specific in what you're asking it to do. And then it will work much better at doing that specific thing than if you just say, please edit this text, make it more readable, something vague like that. You need to really think about what it is you want it to do and break down your editing process in a way that you probably haven't done before because there is no monolithic task of editing. We're actually doing lots of little tasks and just maybe we haven't thought of it that way. Like we're, yes, correcting punctuation. We're also looking for things like cliches. We're looking for vague wording. We're looking for all of these different things, and we lump all of these little tasks into this big idea of editing. But to the AI you may be working with, it's wanting to see it as all of those little tasks instead. So you really need to spell out what you want it to do very, very, very granularly, and then you're going to find that you're getting better results.
Hmm. That's interesting. And it makes me think of, I've listened to a lot of podcasts and people in marketing talking about how to use AI to produce content for you or to streamline your marketing workflow and things like that. And they've compared AI tools to a really intelligent intern. And so it's like, yes, it's really intelligent, but it has never worked in this space before when you're first starting to chat with it. And so you have to give very clear, specific instructions, as you said, the way that you would like a 19-year-old who is very smart, but also totally inexperienced.
I've used that comparison too. I think it's very appropriate. It's this super smart intern, graduated, top of the class, has access to all of human knowledge and all of human history, but doesn't know exactly what you want it to do in that context in which you work. So in your organization, it doesn't know that you want this brand, that this is a brand term that should be spelled this way. You have to teach it those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the same way you would train an intern or a new employee or something like that. Yeah.
I
So,
actually had a student recently who said that taking my course in learning how to prompt so specifically helped her to communicate better with her teenager because instead of saying, do this chore, she started to break it down into the specific parts of the chore, and then he was able to do that much better. So it turns out that this has applications in many different parts of our lives.
Oh, that's brilliant. Like I think about that a lot because my kids are like 4 and 7, and so they're not teenagers yet, thankfully. But we take for granted how much experience we have and how much knowledge we assume that others have, whether they're robots or humans. And that's such a to me that's such an interesting point that that so much gets lost in communication in the translation between parent and child or somebody with their partner or whatever, that we assume they know what we're talking about and we get frustrated when they're not doing what we want them to do, when really we need to take a step back and remember that they don't know exactly what we mean when we say do this or do that. Yeah, that's cool. How did you decide to design the course? Like what were the initial thoughts on what the course would look like?
I had to go with where that the technology was at that point. So I made the decision to shift my work and to focus on putting this training out in late spring 2023. And I knew it was important to be the first out with a reputable, comprehensive training. And I spent all day, all night working on this and learning everything I could. And I managed to get the first version of the course out in August 2023. And I went with where the technology was then. And I've added to it and of course updated the course as the technology has gotten better and as it's changed. So it started out being 5 individual sessions of I like to teach live. That's my preference. And so I would have 5 90-minute sessions, and as capabilities increased, I added to that. So I started it out with a lesson about prompting in general, and a lesson about copy editing, a lesson about content analysis slash developmental editing. But I didn't have, for instance, a fact-checking lesson because I didn't trust AI to do that well. I knew it couldn't do that well at that point. Whenever it got better and I could say, yes, you can use it for fact checking, then I added that lesson into it. So it grew and eventually became 7 90-minute sessions. And then starting about this time last year, fall 2024, I added a second level to the course. So now I have an introductory level that is 7 90-minute sessions, and then I added an advanced level to it that has 7 90-minute sessions. And there's going to be there are things in the works for 2026 to keep up with demand and have new offerings, but that's where we are in this moment in time.
That's exciting. And I can imagine that it is a challenge to update your information because it's changing so quickly, probably faster than any other topic that, we might teach on.
I had to
Um,
have this point where I I had to become okay with the idea of not having everything 100% up to date in what I was teaching because that was just impossible, because it would be so time consuming. I started out every time a button would move on the interface, I would re-record all of these examples. I'd teach live, but I have pre-recorded examples where the prompt is working because I have learned that live demos often don't go as planned. So I do as much of the pre-recording as I can. And I would uh, redo all of that every time just the interface changed just a little bit. And it was just happening so fast. I'm convinced that every single AI company has an entire team whose job it is to move a button a little bit to the left every few weeks. I gave up on being 100% up to date with how things look, but I keep up to date on the basic functionality of it. And if a big model change happens, I go in and update everything so people are getting accurate, up to date information.
Yeah, yeah. And when you started out, how did you start marketing the course? And, what has that process been like as you've grown?
I haven't had to do a lot of work marketing it because AI is a very hot topic right now, and there's been enough word of mouth where I've just had a steady stream of interest because of the topic and people talking about it. I also do a lot of public speaking. I go to a lot of conferences and present on the topic, so people learn about it that way. And those are my it's word of mouth and public speaking are the main ways that I market the course. I haven't had to put too much into advertising yet. So we'll see what happens, but so far I haven't had to.
Yeah, I think you're pretty well known. I mean, I knew about you for a while before we actually connected. And so presenting at those different conferences, being involved in the editorial associations and getting your name out there, it seems like there's such a tight-knit community of editors on the various Facebook pages and on LinkedIn that word would spread pretty quickly, I would think. What So we both know that there are a lot of people out there who feel very strongly opposed to AI.
There
And
are?
so yeah, right. I'm curious what you say or what you would like to say to people who are either skeptical or scared or just don't want AI. Obviously there are going to be people who are just never going to touch it, and that's fine. That's their choice. But what would you say to an editor who is skeptical but maybe curious about AI? Why should we not worry about it taking our jobs? Why is this something that we should be investing in as a skill? What do you typically say to people like that?
Well, I start by validating how people are feeling because everyone's feelings about this technology are valid, whether they're skeptical, fearful, angry, excited. I have been on all points of that scale, and I often find myself jumping around still in that scale. I might be angry and excited. I might be fearful and skeptical. All of these things are valid. So I want to be clear that I do understand that and recognize that. And I am not 100% pro AI, though I know people might think that I am, but I have my own reservations about that as well. And I like to be very open and honest in its capabilities, showing its strengths and also its weaknesses so people are aware. But whenever people come to me and say that they're concerned about it taking their jobs, well, first, validate that I have seen this happen. It's not so much this year, gratefully, but last year, I was hearing almost on a weekly basis from people who said, my my entire team just got laid off and replaced with AI. At least that was the reason given. And that was really, really upsetting. And it was bad for the editors, and it's also bad for the companies. I think people were sold this idea, companies were sold this idea that AI is a magic button you press and then it will do everything for you. And because I haven't heard many people tell me this story in 2025, I'm thinking that they realized that that wasn't true. That was just an idea that they were being sold. Yes, AI can do a lot. It can do a lot of editing tasks. It's very capable and very powerful, but in it by itself, it can't do these things. It requires knowledgeable human editors who know AI prompting, who know how to work with these tools to be able to use them to edit text in a way that makes it a level where it is actually readable and something that people want to spend their time reading. So gratefully, I am not seeing that trend of job loss continue, though I understand that this is more or less anecdotal because it's just what I'm being told. But I would think that the statistics would bear that out. Though you're welcome to fact check me. I would like to know these statistics as well.
Yeah, I've seen posts on LinkedIn where people are saying, they were included in the latest round of cuts with editing agencies. And I don't know what's going on either. I've tried asking around, but people are a little bit, and understandably, scared to talk about it. So I'm wondering if, like what you're describing, these editing agencies in particular are pressured to lower their costs. And they've, like you said, they've been sold this idea that AI can do everything for them. And they're cutting their human editors because they're not, I mean, an editing agency is not going to produce, I don't think, the same quality of edits as you would if you're working one on one, as a client with an editor. So I don't know. It's a complicated situation, but it does seem like they're buying into the idea that, AI can sort of take over and do everything. I think we saw that too, like you were saying early on. I was hearing about it in the marketing circles where people who are social media managers and jobs like that were, oh, ChatGPT can just write everything for me, And then, of course, what they were getting, because they weren't properly training it or prompting it, they were just getting all the same stuff and those words that were being repeated over and over that we never use in real life. And I think in the last year or so, on the marketing side of things, it seems like the industry has really learned that it is truly a tool. It is not a replacement. You have to, as you said, as an intelligent person with knowledge of your industry and your skills that you have to use, you have to tell it very specifically and clearly what you want it to do and give it the information it needs to do its job. And it is not capable of doing your job without you actually in the driver's seat.
That's where I see it with editing for the foreseeable future. I don't know how far into the future I can see at this point, but that's where we are and where we'll be for a period of time. I hope years and at least to get most of us to the end of our careers. We'll see what happens. But that's where we are. It is not a magic button. It is a tool that you have to know how to use as well. And it's our jobs are changing as editors. I think it's akin to how our jobs changed whenever there was wide adoption of personal computers. Suddenly, we had to do our jobs differently. And that's what's happening now. it might look more like guiding a program that's doing the work versus being the one in the document doing, especially those rote grammar, spelling, punctuation changes. It'll be more of having a machine do that, which we're already doing to some extent with spell check, with grammar check. We've had these tools for a long time, and this is just the next evolution of of the of the automation of editing. Not full automation, right? Because it's still
Yeah.
a tool that we're guiding, but it does help us do those parts of our jobs a lot more efficiently than before.
What's your favorite AI tool for editing?
It changes, and it depends on what kind of editing we're talking about. If we are talking about developmental editing, looking at big picture, sort of the content analysis, I really like Notebook LM, which is a Google product. It is so powerful. And it's like I'm getting flushed. I'm so excited about Notebook LM. It's really good with content analysis and it can work with long documents. That's been something that has held up, uh, especially book editors for a while, is that there wasn't a tool out there that could work with a 100 plus page document well. Notebook LM can for certain tasks. So you can ask it content analysis questions to assess the dialogue of a character or to assess the structure of a chapter or of the overall book. That could be something that's helpful for fiction or nonfiction. And it's also really excellent with data extraction. So I know more about fiction, so I can tell you some examples there. If you need to create a character list or a settings list or a timeline, you can have Notebook LM do that in a minute, maybe less, and it will be accurate. And this is something that I would do with every single book, and it would take me hours and hours and hours to do with these things for each book. So much time spent just on creating these tools that I needed in order to be able to do my job well, to make sure that Ricky has blue eyes every time he appeared and not blue eyes 80% of the time and brown eyes 20% of the time, because that happened so often. This
And
is
there's a lot
important
of
to
room
check.
for human error there, right? That if you're having to, do a control F for Ricky and eyes or whatever, like you're naturally going to miss stuff. Whereas the
And
AI
mhm.
is going to be probably not perfect, certainly, but better at catching that kind of thing.
Notebook LM is near perfect with these tasks, with that fact checking on the fly, like the verification piece of it as you're editing something and going through it. You could just say, if you don't have the tools I mentioned created already, you could just say, what color eyes does Ricky have? And it will pull up every instance where in a nicely laid out uh, column of information for you, it'll give you every instance of where it mentioned his eye color. So you can very, very quickly see whether his eyes ever did change, for instance. So that's what I really like for content editing. If I am doing copy editing or copy editing, I like all of the major AI chatbots out there right now for this. ChatGPT does a good job. Claude does a good job. They all do a good job with this as long as you are giving it a smaller piece of text. You can't just drop 100 plus page document into it and say, copy edit this. and expect that it's going to do a good job the entire length of the manuscript. You really have to focus and give it smaller pieces. So maybe that's a chapter, depending on the text you're working with and how many errors there are. You might want to go smaller, even just making sure that you're giving it smaller slices to do that task. And that's necessary because of the way that the technology works, which I won't geek out and bore people too much with getting into that. But that's why you need to do smaller pieces with copy editing. But when you're talking big picture, you can give it the full manuscript and have it work well because of how the technology is built. For line editing, I am really liking the newest version of Draftsmith. It's put out by the same company that has out Perfected, which is a tool I know a lot of editors are already using and have used for a long time and really like a lot. Draftsmith works really well at a line by line level. So why I like it for line editing. If you run across one of those sentences that's a paragraph long and it's knotted up and has semicolons and it's just a mess, you can plop it into Draftsmith, which if you're working in Microsoft Word is perfect because it works right in Microsoft Word and it will clean that up and give you a simplified version of that sentence that where right there for one sentence it might have saved you minutes. So then multiply that by how many paragraph long knotted up sentences you have and it adds up to a lot of time savings.
Yeah, Daniel Human, who created Perfect It and Draftsmith, was on the podcast with me. We had a great conversation about it. It is a
Well,
really,
then you know.
yeah, I've tried it. It's a really interesting. I don't do a lot of editing much anymore either because of running my own course and program and stuff, which is, as you know, a full-time job in itself. But yeah, it's a really cool tool for exactly what you were saying. I like almost it's almost like a spell check on steroids or something, where it's you're analyzing the whole sentence or the paragraph or something, and it's better at thinking through how to rephrase things than, the editor might be when, especially when you're tired and you've been editing a lot of text. How about for references lists?
Ooh, this one, I'm sure that there are other people who do have a better answer for this. Since I don't have a ton of experience, as we said, I liked to edit fiction because it didn't have reference lists, but I do teach a prompt that you can use just in any of the major AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Copilot that will format those references for you. But that's another situation where you don't want to, if you have a really, really long list, you might need to put it in pieces. So maybe you work with 15 references at a time instead of the full however many you might have, four
Yeah.
pages worth of references.
Hmm. Yeah, if we could perfect AI to edit and format references lists, that would be a dream come true, just to dump the whole list right in there. But
We'll get there. It does a good
yeah.
job. You have to be really specific and use some semi-fancy prompting techniques to get it to follow the formatting that you need. We can already do those smaller pieces well with what we have currently available. And it's just a matter of time until we can drop the full list in there and have it be able to work with it well.
Now, what about, dealing with clients? So I know, we talked about editors who are skeptical or worried or scared. What about if an editor is, has taken your course and wants to use AI to help them be more efficient and more accurate? What do you tell them to tell their clients who are worried about, running their manuscripts through some of these tools?
this is a really important question to address, and it's one that everybody has. If you're working with individual clients, then it's different than if you are working for a company. And hopefully that company will have an AI use policy that you can follow. But if you're working with individual clients, the most important piece of it, or I guess it's two parts. There's two most important pieces. The first is transparency, explaining precisely how you plan to use AI and what tools you're going to use, what security measures you've put in place to protect their intellectual property. The second piece is to get their permission. So don't do this behind their backs. Make sure that they know what you plan to do and that they agree to it. And that likely looks like a clause in your contract. It would be even better if you have a conversation with them so you can address any questions that they might have about how you plan to use it. So when you are able to do, when you're able to be transparent and have permission, then that sets you up to have a good working relationship. But I know that there are lingering concerns about data privacy and data security, and rightfully so. There, in all of the major tools that you're likely to use, there are ways to opt out of data training, which means giving that company permission to use anything you type into it or any documents you upload to create the next version of their product. And I think that if you're already paying them, they don't also need your information as well. You're doing enough to help them. So I instruct and advise people to opt out of all of those data training toggles, and sometimes there are multiple you have to toggle out of for each tool. But I think it's a best practice still to operate under the assumption that nothing you do on the internet is truly private. I mean, so many companies have gotten hacked, and we've all had our information hacked if we've ever put anything on the internet. We have to operate under that understanding that nothing that's on the cloud or uses the internet is truly private, but we can take the steps available to us to protect that information as much as possible. And I show people how to do that in my trainings.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know that's a huge concern on both for both the editors and for the clients. So, and I'm sure that, taking your course, people aren't just going to learn prompts or how to speak to the AI, but they're also going to get a better understanding of how it works and how to change some of those settings and how to, to talk to their clients even. Like we as professionals have to understand, at least on a basic level, how these tools operate so that we can communicate that clearly to our clients, like you said, and reassure them. So this has been such an interesting conversation. I think I could talk to you for hours about this topic. But tell us, if people are interested in enrolling in the program and working with you, how can they get in touch? And is there anything else that you would like them to know?
You can find out more about the AI for Editors courses at my website, which is www.aiforeditors.com. I also do custom private trainings for companies and organizations and various types of groups. And if you'd like to talk to me about that, you're welcome to email me at Erin, which is ERIN, at aiforeditors.com. I'd love to have that conversation. So that's where people can find out more about me. I'm also on LinkedIn, which whenever I have more free time, I post more there. things about artificial intelligence, and I'd love to connect. So yes, please, let's say hello and get to know each other.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us, Erin.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.